this morning. Those of you that could come, we trust that others will be able to come as time goes on. Of course, we're just going to have, is it one more or two more? Two more, okay.
First two in May.
So, we're still in 1 Samuel. We're studying chapters 28, and we're going to go ahead into, 29 and into chapter 30 this morning. And you'll have to pray for me because I keep getting mixed up in all of these things.
It just kind of just flows around here. We all have our moments. It's all right.
Yeah, we have no excuse.
Somebody will remember, surely.
I have plenty of moments, but the Lord is always faithful. So, trust that the word will bless you this morning. Chapter 29 of 1 Samuel. Now the Philistines gathered together all their armies to Aphek, and the Israelites pitched by a fountain which is in Jezreel. So there's war again between the Philistines and Israel. Verse 2, and the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands. But David and his men passed on in the rearward, how do you pronounce that?
I say reward. What do you say? Rearward?
Well, I can just say the first one easier.
Reward, anyway, in the rear with Achish.
Bringing up the
Yeah,
back.
why don't they just say that?
Bringing up the back, yes. So, the Philistines are going against Israel. What is David and his men doing? Now, Achish was the king of, was it Gath, which is in the Philistine country. And Israel and the Philistines were always fighting with each other. So here they are again. The Philistines would really like to take all of Israel's territory. Of course, God doesn't allow that. But David is with the Philistines now, and he has told King Achish here of the Philistines that he would be of the men that was taking care of Achish so that Achish wouldn't be killed. These kings always had certain men that they trusted to stay right with them all the time so to make sure that they wouldn't be killed. And so that's the place that Achish had given David. And David took that place. But here he's marching with Achish now and the Philistines going against Israel. Do you think that's what David really wanted to do?
No.
Why then did he do it? Why was he marching with them against Israel?
Moment of fear in his life that he compromised?
There was fear in his heart, yes, and he was willing to compromise because of fear. He should have gone to the Lord, but he didn't. What does that tell us?
I think he was just too full of himself. He thought he could make it by himself.
He probably thought that. Thought he was too full of himself.
Pride.
Thought he could do what was right and so on. But he couldn't. But now he's in a problem.
He's in a pickle.
Yeah, in a pickle. He's marching with the Philistines against Israel. Verse 3, then said the princes of the Philistines, what do these Hebrews here? So they hadn't known that David and his men were going to be fighting with him, but then now that they started on the journey, they saw these Hebrews, these Israelites, were with Achish going as they were going against Israel. And so the princes or the leaders of the Philistines came to Achish asking him, what are these Israelites, these Hebrews doing here? And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, is not this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days or these years? Now he had been with him, in our last chapter, said a year and 4 months, and so it was probably a little bit longer than that he had been there. But he had been there long enough that Achish had begun to trust him. And he said, is not this David, and so on? It says, which has been with me these days or these years, and I have found no fault in him since he fell unto me unto this day. So Achish was taken up for David. He says, I haven't found any fault in him. And he has helped me, and he has been with me, and so I can trust him. It says we can trust him. Verse 4, and the princes of the Philistines were with wrath with him. That didn't satisfy them. They were angry, and that was good that it didn't satisfy
It's
them.
kinda
They were
like-
thinking more seriously.
But God.
Yes, that's right. And the princes of the Philistines said unto him, make this fellow return, that he may go to his place which thou hast appointed him. They knew that David had been there, and Achish had given him a certain place to live, and he said, make him go back there. He says, and let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us, for wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Should it not be with the heads of these men? He says, if he goes with us, he'll start taking off our heads and that will cause him to reconcile with Saul. They knew that he'd had a problem with Saul, and Saul was trying to kill him and so on. But they were thinking more seriously and more correctly. Achish had just been hoodwinked. David had caused Achish to believe him.
Why do you think Achish received him in the first place? He knew who David was. Why did he not kill him right then and there? Why did he receive him?
I have wondered as I've studied
He
this.
was making such good, he went along with him, he was good.
He
He was
is-
a good mate.
That's right. If he was fighting for the Philistines, it would have been a real help to them. And Achish probably was thinking of that. I think also Achish had a soft heart.
Oh,
And I could see that as we were studying
Okay.
more about this. And so I think he probably was giving him a chance. And then when he stayed with them, it was over a year and
And
4 months and over
Look at verse 5,
that.
this says it all.
Yes, and everything was okay. And so, he was willing to trust
that's
him,
neat.
where the others didn't. The others wouldn't give him a chance, which they were correct. But in verse 5, they said, is not this David, of whom they sang one to another in dances, saying, Saul slew his thousands and David his 10,000s? They realized this was the one that was a very good warrior, yes. But they didn't trust him to be fighting for them. So in verse 6, then Achish called David and said unto him, surely as the Lord liveth, thou hast been upright, and thy going out and thy coming in with me, and the host is good in my sight, for I have not found evil in thee since the day of thy coming unto me unto this day. Nevertheless, the leaders of the Philistines favor thee not. He says, they don't have confidence in you. And so, he says in verse 7, wherefore now return and go in peace, that thou displease not the lords of the Philistines. He says, we need to do what they're saying because they don't trust you. So you go on back to your place. Verse 8, and David said, and this bothers me too for David, because he's still
playing the game.
He's still wanting to
Pretend.
yes, for
Still
David.
playing the part.
David said unto Achish, verse 8, but what have I done? And what hast thou found in thy servant so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I may not go fight against the enemies of my lord the king? David should have taken his chance right there and said, well, okay, I'll go. But he didn't. And I think he realized that Achish wouldn't have let him. He realized that this wasn't really taking a chance, because Achish would have done what his leaders told him to do. And so David just went on with this that was wrong. He was involved in pretending he was willing to go with Achish and fight against his own people. Karen, read verse 7 of Psalms 124. There's a verse there that I want to read, showing, I believe this shows David's thoughts during this time. And you know, I'd like to know more. I need to study into the Psalms more, to know more which Psalms David was really thinking of during a lot of these different incidents that he was going through. And this could have been one at this point of time. Psalms 124, verse 7.
Verse 7.
Mhm.
Our soul is escaped as bird of a snare with valor. The snare is broken, and ye are escaped.
Okay?
Wow.
He was probably thinking, that was probably some of his thoughts at this time. Because David still loved the Lord. His heart was still with the Lord. And his heart was still with Israel. It was just Saul that he was having a problem with. And he couldn't do anything as long as Saul was the king. Because whatever he would do, Saul wasn't pleased with. And so he was continuing with this deception. But I'm sure that his heart was bothering him
Yeah,
during this time.
David was with God.
So, verse 9. And Achish answered and said to David, I know that thou art good in my sight as an angel of God. This is one of the things I wondered about him. Why was he talking about an angel of God? I don't think that the Philistines were talking about angels. They would always talk about their false
They're
gods.
idols.
But he was talking about an angel of God. I think he had a soft place in his heart.
Because he knew David's heart.
Yeah.
In
And-
verse 6, he said, as the Lord liveth, and Achish said that.
That's right. That's the
Oh.
Lord. So maybe David had talked to him about his God. And so anyway, verse 10 there, he said, wherefore now, this is still Achish talking to David, wherefore now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come with thee, and as soon as ye be up early in the morning and have light, depart. So he told David, he says, you go ahead and depart early in the morning. Let's all turn, keep your place in Samuel, but let's all turn to Psalms 37 and read a verse there. A lot of these Psalms that David wrote were different because of different incidents that he had been going through and had gone through. So in Psalms 37, verse 23, we read, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. I'm sure David was delighting in the way of God here, and that God was, no matter what wrong things David had been doing, God was still with him. God was still guiding him.
All the way.
They are ordered by the Lord, and we can hold on to these Psalms too. In different times in our life, we need to really realize that our steps are ordered by the Lord. We don't always understand them, but we can know that they're of God, that God is leading us when that is in our heart. Now, he doesn't lead us if we're just going our own way and not paying any attention to him. But he was leading David even this in that time in David's life, because he knew David's heart. Down deep in his heart, he was wanting the Lord, and God knew that. And
I have written in my Bible here, this is from years ago in ladies' meeting. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and the stops also.
that's
Esther
right.
Johnson was the one that said that.
Yeah.
Is that right?
And the stops
And the
also
stops
are ordered
also.
by the Lord. That's good, yes. So that's the way it was with David. So, verse 11, David and his men rose up early to depart in the morning, to return into the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. They went on their way to fight with Israel. David didn't have to go and fight against his people. That would have been, I just don't understand. I can't grasp what David would have done if God hadn't helped him here. If he had had to fight against some of his own people, I don't know what he would have done.
God knew he probably couldn't make that decision. He didn't know.
Yeah,
He didn't
So God
have to.
that was
took
the
care of
grace
it.
of God.
It was.
Yeah, he didn't have to make that decision. So, I want to go ahead into chapter 30 then now and see what went on with David in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 30. And it came to pass when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day. See, that's where Achish had told him to go and live in Ziklag. So that's where they went. They had been there over a year and maybe closer to 2 years. And they had their families there, their children, they were all set up. They went to Ziklag. Then David told them, well, let's go fight with the Philistines against Israel. So they followed David. It was a good thing that they would follow David, but I'm sure in their hearts they weren't happy about that either.
Yeah, they were probably apprehensive.
But now they came back to Ziklag, and notice, it says, they came to Ziklag on the third day. Now they had been marching quite a ways. It took them 3 days to get away, to get back from where they were. Says that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag, and had smitten Ziklag and burned it with fire. So here they came back after 3 days of walking, getting back to their homes, longing to get back with their families and to their own homes now and be able to relax a little bit and go ahead with life. And it's all burned with fire. Their families are gone. They don't know where they are. They just know that they've been captured, and so no telling what they're having to go through, and they don't have a home that they can relax in. They don't have all of their animals, I'm sure, had been taken. They didn't have anything. What a feeling did they have at that time? It would have been terrible. So, I put here, God corrected, but he didn't destroy. He destroyed their homes, but he didn't destroy their families. Because notice in verse 2, and they had taken the women captives and were therein. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away and went on their way. That was not a customary thing for the warfare between these two countries. It was, when David fought against these 3 countries because he needed some food and so on to start living there, he killed all of the women, the children, the men, everyone, so there wouldn't be anyone to tell on him, to let the people know what he had done. He killed them all. But how gracious God is. He had these men not kill him, just took them captives, even the women and all the children, took them captives, but they didn't kill any of them. That was only God. And notice, who was it? The Amalekites that had come and done this. Now, what did we read about the Amalekites back in several years before this?
Saul was to kill
Wicked
them all.
people.
Saul was supposed to kill them all.
Yes, remember, Saul was supposed to kill all of them. Did he do that?
No.
No. And so here now are ones that were left. They have a lot more probably than they did at that time, but they were just as wicked. And if Saul had killed all of them, like God said, in obedience to God, then there wouldn't have been enough Amalekites at this point in time to come and do the wicked things they were doing. But Saul didn't obey, and so now they are back.
And God is using them.
God still used them, yes, in the way he wanted. Verse 3, so David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters were taken captives. Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept, I can imagine, until they had no more power to weep. I'm sure they sat down and began weeping, and they couldn't be
Comforted.
satisfied at all. That word, it says they grieved. Where was it? Anyway, the word grieved is about them. We'll read it. And that word grieved has the meaning of bitter. They became, the more they thought about it, the more bitter they became against who? David. Because David was the one that was their leader. They were following him. And notice verse 5 says, David's 2 wives were taken captives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved. There's that word grieved, and that means bitter. Every man for his sons and for his daughters. But notice what David did. David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. David is finally realizing he better get back to the Lord. He better start seeking the Lord and obeying him in these decisions that he was making. And so he encouraged himself in the Lord. And it's so good that he would do that. This was a terrible trial, because he lost his wife, lost his children, lost everything. They didn't know that they were going to get their wives and children back. Their homes were burned, their animals had been taken, everything was gone. And notice in verse 7, and David said to Abiathar the priest, Abimelech's son, I pray thee, bring me hither the ephod. And Abiathar brought thither the ephod to David. Now the ephod was something that the priest, a part of the priest's garments, but it's what was used to, and I'm not sure just how they used it. Do you know more how they did?
The Urim and Thummim were inside of it, I don't know how or why, but it was inside the ephod. I just read that recently, in a pocket.
Oh.
And that's what they used to determine God's will. So
Well,
it was-
that's where they had the Urim and Thummim.
It was inside the ephod.
Anyway, Abiathar had come before this. And if you remember, we read about it in a couple of chapters before. Abiathar, a priest, had come and was with David. But we don't read that David did anything about the ephod that the Abiathar would have had. But now,
Did he come after Saul had all the
Priest
priests of Nob or wherever they were?
Yeah.
All of the rest of
Killed.
his family was
Yeah.
all killed, and this fellow was left.
yeah, and he came. And it was sometime after that, after the priests were killed. But it was before this that Abiathar had come, and David hadn't taken advantage of the ephod that Abiathar had until now. But now, and we wonder sometimes why the Lord allows bad things to happen to us. It isn't always because we've disobeyed God, like David did. It isn't always because we're not living in the way that the Lord wants us to live and so on. But sometimes it is. But anyway, the Lord uses these things. Whatever comes into our life, the Lord wants to use it for our good. And if we will turn to him, he will. No matter how bad it seems, or no matter how hard it is to go through with, if we will go to the Lord with these things and trust him, he will do what is needed in our lives and to help us in whatever way we need. And like I say, it doesn't mean that we have always done something bad, But it does mean that when we do, the Lord will bring things to turn our lives around. But then otherwise, the Lord brings things to cause us to just trust in Him and let Him direct our lives. Let Him order our steps. And so this is what is going on. David encouraged himself in the Lord his God, and then he told Abiathar to bring the ephod to him. In verse 8, and David inquired at the Lord, saying, shall I pursue after this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he answered them. The Lord answered him when he went to him with the way that the Lord had ordered for them to find out his will. He answered him, pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. So God is telling him, go ahead and pursue him. He's asking God now what to do, and so God is right there helping him in everything that he needs to be helped in. Numbers 27:21. Leanne, get that and read for us. Numbers 27:21. This has to do with the ephod. And God told him they would recover all. Numbers 27:21.
And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall ask counsel for him after the judgment of Urim before the Lord. At his word shall they go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the children of Israel with him, even all the congregation.
See, that was instruction that God had given them years before, but the instruction was still the same. If you'll go to the Lord and go according to the Lord's ways of using the ephod, using the Urim and the Thummim, asking the Lord what to do, He will guide them every time. And He will guide us every time. If we will seek the Lord and ask, there will be times in our lives when we don't know what to do. Then is when we need to trust the Lord. And if He doesn't let us know immediately, continue going to Him. Don't just sit back and say, well, I asked the Lord and He didn't tell me what to do. Continue going to Him. Continue praying. Continue asking Him. And I will tell you, without a doubt, He will answer you, because that's who God is. God wants us to obey Him. He wants us to be able to guide us. And if we will let Him, He will guide us. He might not just immediately when we think He should, but He will guide us. So continue going to Him. Don't go to Him just once and think, well, I asked the Lord and He didn't tell me. That's what David did in part of the time. Continue going to Him, and He will tell you. He will help you. And so David inquired at the Lord at this time. And verse 9 says, so David went in, he and his 600 men that were with him, and came to the brook Besor, where those that were left behind stayed. There were some that had left behind. They had left with their things that they had owned. Let's read verse 10 again. But David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 abode behind, which were so faint that they could not go over the brook Besor. So by this time they had been walking and traveling with the Philistines. Then they had come back. They had gone through all of this sorrow and weeping because all of their family was gone and everything, and they didn't have enough strength to continue going. 200 of them stayed back. 400 of them went. David took the 400 that was able to go, and he pursued. Verse 11, and they found an Egyptian in the field, and brought him to David, and gave him bread, and he did eat, and they made him drink water. So as they were walking, going to pursue these Amalekites that had burned their city and taken their family. As they were walking through the fields, they saw this man that was laying out there. He was almost dead. And they could tell that he was almost dead. And so they gave him something to eat and gave him water to drink. And verse 12, and they gave him a piece of a cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit came again to him. See, he was almost gone. But when he ate something, he started getting his life back to him again. For he had eaten no bread or drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. I've heard that you can go without food that long, but you can't go without water that long. So anyway, he was close to death. Verse 13, and David said unto him, to whom belongest thou, and whence art thou? Where did you come from? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite, and my master left me because 3 days agone before I fell sick. Can you imagine? He was sick because he hadn't eaten anything. Now they had gotten food and all of the things that David and his men had when they were waiting there in Ziklag, or when they came back and so on. But there must have been food in Ziklag, was my thinking. And yet he didn't give enough food for this servant of his to live on. It just shows what kind of people they were. I'm sure they had enough food for themselves. But anyway, he fell sick. Verse 14, we made an invasion upon the south of the Cherethites, and upon the coast which belongeth to Judah, and upon the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. So now David and his men knew. And David said to him, canst thou bring me down to this company? And he said, swear unto me by God that thou wilt neither kill me nor deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will bring thee down to this company. So he didn't want to be brought down to his master, because he figured his master would kill him if he knew that he had told them where to find the Amalekites. And verse 16, when he had brought him down, behold, they were spread abroad. So this Egyptian man did take them to where the Amalekites were, and they saw them spread abroad, and notice, upon all the earth, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil that they had taken out of the land of the Philistines and out of the land of Judah. So they had been having great victories. They had taken a lot of spoil from these lands, and they were happy, eating and drinking and dancing and making merry. Verse 17, and David smote them. So David, soon as he got to them, he started killing them. Smote them from the twilight even unto the evening of the next day, about 24 hours. And there escaped not a man of them, save for 400 young men which rode upon camels and fled. It's good that they got on camels and fled away. However, they were Amalekites that fled. So verse 18, David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his 2 wives. And there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil nor anything that they had taken to them. David recovered all. God had told them that they would. He had told them that he would help them to recover everything. And so he did, and David recovered all. And David took all the flocks and the herds which they drave before their cattle, and said, this is David's spoil. I had to laugh at that, because they not only took the spoil that they had gotten from Ziklag, from David and his company, but spoil that they had gotten from other places that they had conquered also. And David says, this is my spoil. This
He
is-
made a haul.
Yes. And he claimed what he felt belonged to him. Pardon me. Verse 21, and David came to the 200 men, when they were coming back now to Ziklag, to the 200 men which were so faint that they could not follow David, whom they had made also to abide as the brook Besor. And they went forth to meet David. So these 200 that had stayed, they heard David and his men coming, so they went to meet him, and of course they were coming with all their cattle and sheep and so on. It was a large company that came back, and to meet the people that were with him. And when David came near to the people, he saluted them. Verse 22, then answered all of the wicked men and men of Belial. Now these are men that were following David.
Yeah.
They were still, there was 400 of them, and some of them were wicked men. And they had been following and obeying David, but they still, their hearts were not right before God. So then answered the wicked men and men of Belial, of those that went with David, and said, because they went not with us, we will not give them aught of the spoil, any of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and his children. They'll be that nice to them. We'll give them this, probably because they didn't want to have to fool with their wives.
Smart.
Said, we'll give them their wives and children, that they may lead them away and depart. Well, did David say, okay, we'll do that? No.
Well, and they probably knew that David would not allow them to keep these men's wives and their children, even if they'd wanted them.
Probably. Then said David, ye shall not do so, my brethren. He still calls them my brethren. Saith, with that which the Lord hath given us, no, which the Lord has given us.
Yes.
David now is acknowledging the Lord. David has learned some pretty good lessons by now. And he has known that God has been with him, that God is the one that caused them not to have to fight against their own people, that God was providing for them, and he was acknowledging that. He says, the Lord has given us, who hath preserved us and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. He's giving all the glory to God now. For who will hearken unto you in the matter? But as his part is that goeth down to the battle, so shall his part be that tarrieth by the stuff. They shall part alike. And it was so from that day forward that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day, that whoever would go to the battle would get the same rewards as those that stayed. They would all get the same battle, same rewards from the battle that they would win.
You
And
know,
when
it's kind of interesting, these worthless men that David, that created this particular scenario. It's like it makes you wonder, they probably recognized that David was a leader, a man of war, and that's why they followed him. But they didn't see David's heart, even as well as Achish did.
Yeah.
You see, Achish knew, I think, that David was a man of God,
Yeah.
you see.
I believe
And that's
he
what
did
he
too.
recognized him for,
Also,
but
he-
not these men.
even so, he's the one that took care of the battle.
But that's what I'm
That's
saying, I think that's what they saw. They saw him as a man of war, a good leader, but they didn't recognize his heart, or they would have never even suggested this thing to him.
No. And when David, verse 26, when David came to Ziklag, he sent of the spoil unto the elders of Judah, even to his friends, saying, behold, a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. Now David had gotten all of this spoil. It was just a whole lot, because it was spoil that the Amalekites had gotten from other countries that they had been fighting with and winning the battles. And so instead
Women
of,
don't do that. Women might fight, but boy, they wouldn't do something like that.
instead of David just saying it all to themselves, up here he said, this is David's spoil, part of that. Well, but he's giving part of his spoil
Yeah.
now to others, says, even to his friends, saying, behold, a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. Verse 27, to them which were in Bethel, and to them which were in South Ramoth, and to them which were in Jatir, and to them which were in Aurora, and to them which were in Siphnoth, and to them which were with the Estamos, all of these countries, look what he's giving to them which were in Rachel, to them which were in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, and to them which were in the cities of the Kenites, and to them which were in Hormah, and to them which were in Chor-ashan, and to them which were in Atak, and to them which were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were wont to haunt. All of those people.
Yeah.
He is very generous in giving to all, making sure that they had a part of the spoil that he had gotten, because he knew that God had been with him. And why do you think that he would do that?
Because the Lord was with him. The Lord has been with him all along.
That's right, the Lord was with him and was dealing with him.
Well, maybe he appreciated them because they had kind of helped him, kind of stood with him and all that time that he was running for his life from Saul. That maybe they weren't part of the ones that tried to turn him in or had supported him the best they could.
But it can't just be because he was a fighter. It can't just be that. It has to be in here.
Yeah,
He's showing his love and his heart towards Israel by doing all this.
he's showing his love and his heart, yes. And I think he's wanting them to know that he did leave. See, he left Israel and went to the Palestinians.
Palestinians.
Philip
Palestinians?
Philistines, that's what I,
starts with a P.
okay. Went to the Philistines. He went there, but he didn't want them to think that he had turned away from
Right.
Israel. He didn't want them to think that he had forgotten all about them and that he was their enemy now.
Wanted them to
He
know.
wanted them to realize that
Yeah.
he still loved them and he was still a part of them. I think he was just using a lot of wisdom here,
Yes.
along with a lot of wanting their friendship still.
And show him he was still with Israel.
Yes.
And the fact, when a man is a leader, they're specific where they go, what they do,
Mhm.
with whom they do it.
Mhm.
A man that's a leader, it's real obvious.
Yes, that's right. So David is taking care. And what that did do, I believe, because it's not too long from now, as we'll be studying,
Yeah.
that Saul is going to be killed and David is going to be king. And he is wanting the people to lead him and look to him as their leader, as their king. That will help. I believe that David really knew, because God had told him, God had anointed him as king. And especially now that he has turned and begin obeying the Lord again like he was supposed to all along, he can't help but be thinking about the fact, well, Lord, I know you still want me to be king, and I will be. So he's wanting to let the people know that he still is their leader, even though he's not there right now.
And when a man is allowing God to lead him, he doesn't say, but it's in my time, you gotta let me do it. He allows God to lead him and guide him. And he might have things going, but if God says, he'll obey the Lord.
Yes. What Janet is saying is, when a man is a leader, he wants people to know that he is going to lead them with the Lord, and that he's going to allow the Lord to guide him and to lead him and so on. So, glad to have you join us online and glad to have the ones that are here. And the Lord willing, we'll study the next chapter next week.